This comparison only works because reality has been quietly removed from the room. Reddington doesn't outsmart the FBI in the way people like to believe. He operates in a world where hesitation is written into the system, where consequences arrive late, and where institutions behave like individuals instead of machines. On television, that feels like brilliance. In real life, it would look like a problem escalating out of control. The illusion is subtle, but powerful. Raymond Reddington appears dominant because everyone around him pauses. They listen, they negotiate, they explain themselves. And that pause is mistaken for intelligence. Viewers confuse calm with control, preparation with superiority, and access with authority. But real institutions don't get impressed by confidence. They get alarmed by it. They don't reward unpredictability, they isolate it. The idea that one man could consistently manipulate a federal agency through charm and information isn't just unlikely. It misunderstands how power behaves under threat. Systems don't slow down when they're challenged. They harden, they close ranks, they remove variables. So when people say Reddington beats the FBI, they're not describing intelligence. They're describing a story where reality has been edited out just long enough for the illusion to feel real. You already know the Blacklist. You don't need a recap. You don't need character bios or episode summaries. This isn't about continuity errors or plot holes. This is about how power is presented versus how power actually behaves when real institutions feel threatened. What you're watching in this show isn't a realistic clash between a criminal mastermind and the FBI. It's a carefully controlled fantasy where institutional behavior is softened to allow a single character to dominate the frame. Fictional dominance works by simplifying systems, slowing reactions, and turning organizations into conversations. Real institutions don't function that way. They don't argue themselves into submission. They don't admire cleverness under pressure. They don't grant long-term freedom to unpredictable outsiders. So this breakdown isn't about what the show gets wrong. It's about what the show has to remove in order for the story to exist at all. Once you stop judging the scenes as drama and start viewing them through human behavior, fear response, and institutional survival, the entire dynamic shifts. The question stops being, how is Reddington so smart? And becomes, why is the system behaving in a way it never would? Raymond Reddington looks smarter than the FBI because the show consistently mistakes calm confidence for intelligence. He speaks slowly. He never appears rushed. He always seems prepared. On screen, those traits read as superiority. But in reality, they're neutral behaviors that only gain power when the environment around them hesitates. The illusion deepens through timing. Reddington arrives with answers at the exact moment the system needs them, which feels like genius. But that timing only works because the FBI is written as perpetually reactive. They wait for problems to surface instead of anticipating them. They respond instead of preempt. That delay is crucial. Slow the system just enough. And any prepared individual looks exceptional. Real institutions don't give you that window. They move before certainty, not after it. They act on risk, not proof. By portraying the FBI as a collection of people waiting to be convinced, the show creates space for Reddington to shine. That space is the illusion. Intelligence isn't what dominates the room. Tempo does. And when the tempo is artificially reduced, control shifts to whoever appears calm enough to fill the silence. Reddington doesn't look smarter because he's operating above the system. He looks smarter because the system has been slowed down to his speed. The show treats information like currency. Trade enough of it, and you earn freedom. Deliver the right secret at the right moment, and doors open, restrictions loosen, leverage expands. In the Blacklist, information behaves like money in a closed economy. Whoever controls it dictates the terms. That's why secrets feel powerful on screen. They buy time, they buy trust, they buy autonomy. Every correct tip makes Reddington look more indispensable, more protected, more untouchable. But in real institutions, information doesn't buy freedom. It buys attention. And attention is dangerous. Secrets don't elevate you in real life. They expose you. Every piece of intelligence immediately triggers secondary questions. How was this obtained? Who else has access? What channels were compromised? What laws were crossed? Instead of trust increasing, scrutiny multiplies. The more accurate the information, the more aggressively institutions try to map its origin. Access doesn't reassure systems, it alarms them. That's the inversion the show depends on. On television, when Reddington delivers results, the FBI leans in. They listen more closely, they rely more heavily. In reality, success would do the opposite. It would narrow his freedom. Access would become compartmentalized. Information flow would be restricted. Autonomy would shrink as oversight expands. Because institutions don't ask, how useful is he? They ask, what happens if he stops cooperating? That question transforms everything. Once it's asked, leverage collapses into liability. The asset becomes a risk node, and risk nodes get isolated. The illusion works because the show frames information as a gift. In reality, information is a liability trail. Every secret leaves fingerprints. Every correct prediction raises the probability that the source is embedded deeper than they admit. Trust isn't built on results alone. It's built on predictability. And unpredictable success is often the most suspicious outcome of all. Fear on television behaves like hesitation. It slows conversations. It creates moral debates. It gives characters space to argue, doubt, and reflect. In that pause, characters like Raymond Reddington gain leverage. Fear becomes a vacuum they can step into, filling the silence with confidence and control. That's not how fear works in real institutions. Real fear doesn't create pauses. It triggers protocols. When real systems feel threatened, authority compresses upward. Decision-making centralizes. Discretion disappears. Individual judgment is replaced by hierarchy. The goal stops being clever solutions and becomes damage control. Fear doesn't invite negotiation. It eliminates it. On screen, fear makes people cautious. In reality, fear makes people rigid. Under pressure, institutions reduce variables. They limit access. They narrow communication channels. They cut autonomy because autonomy creates exposure. The more dangerous the situation feels, the less freedom individuals are allowed to exercise. That's not incompetence. It's survival behavior. The show reverses this logic. It presents fear as something that paralyzes the system just long enough for an outsider to dominate it. Real fear does the opposite. It hardens systems against outsiders first. That's why autonomy disappears under pressure. Not because people panic, but because they understand consequences. When careers, reputations, and legal exposure are on the line, no one wants to be the person who took an unnecessary risk. Fear shifts incentives. It rewards compliance, not creativity. It favors predictability over brilliance. So when Reddington appears to thrive in moments of institutional fear, what you're really seeing isn't dominance. It's a story where fear has been rewritten to behave politely. In reality, fear doesn't create space for outsiders to rise. It collapses that space entirely. What looks like authority on screen is often just permission-wearing confidence. Reddington's influence inside the FBI is built on access, not command. He's allowed into rooms, he's allowed to speak, he's allowed to withhold and reveal information at will. On television, that access reads as power. Viewers instinctively equate proximity to decision-makers with authority over them. But those are not the same thing. Real power doesn't ask for access, it controls it. Being allowed to participate is not the same as being able to decide. Permission is conditional by design. It exists as long as it's useful, controllable, and low risk. The moment that balance shifts, permission disappears. Real institutions understand this distinction clearly. Access is granted cautiously, reviewed constantly, and revoked without ceremony. The show blurs that line because revoking access would end the dynamic it depends on. In reality, the more unpredictable someone becomes, the more aggressively their access is narrowed. Risk doesn't expand influence, it contracts it. That's why permission is always temporary. It's not power, it's a test phase. And real systems never let test phases run indefinitely. The moment uncertainty outweighs usefulness, doors close, channels collapse, and the illusion of authority evaporates. What looks like dominance on television is simply a delay in revocation. On screen, loyalty feels emotional. Teams bond. Trust forms through shared experiences. Conversations replace calculations. In the Blacklist, the room stays aligned because the story needs it to. People hesitate to turn on the outsider because doing so would feel like betrayal. Real-world loyalty doesn't work that way. It's not driven by emotion, it's driven by survival. In real institutions, loyalty flows towards stability, not personalities. The moment a situation threatens careers, reputations, or legal exposure, alignment shifts fast. Blame avoidance becomes the dominant instinct. People don't ask who they like. They ask who might cost them their job. That's when rooms turn. Not slowly, immediately. Outsiders are the first variables removed because they're the easiest to isolate. Emotional bonds collapse under institutional pressure. Self-preservation overrides admiration every time. The show avoids this reality because once the group turns, the story ends. But in real life, the group turning is not dramatic. It's procedural. Meetings happen without you. Information bypasses you. Decisions are made upstream. The outsider doesn't get confronted. They get quietly cut out. That's how institutions protect themselves. They don't explode. They close ranks. Accountability is the missing gravity in this entire equation. On television, decisions float. Mistakes reset. Risk rarely carries personal cost. In reality, every decision has a name attached to it. Someone signs off, someone approves, someone is responsible when it goes wrong. That single difference reshapes behavior completely. When accountability is real, cleverness becomes dangerous. Innovation slows. Risk tolerance drops. People stop asking what's impressive and start asking what's defensible. That's when creativity gives way to caution. The show removes this pressure because accountability collapses momentum. Real FBI decision-making is shaped less by intelligence and more by exposure. No one wants to be the person whose judgment becomes a case study. So behavior narrows. Options shrink. Safe paths dominate. This is why real institutions appear boring. They're optimized to survive scrutiny, not to look smart. Once accountability enters the frame, autonomy disappears. Power recenters, and outsiders stop being indulged. Risk avoidance doesn't mean incompetence. It means the system is functioning exactly as designed. And that design leaves no room for unchecked dominance. Television treats negotiation like power. Whoever sets the terms looks dominant. Whoever speaks calmly across the table appears in control. In shows like The Blacklist, negotiation becomes the ultimate display of intelligence. Reddington talks, the FBI listens, and the balance of power seems to tilt in his favor. But that's a narrative illusion. Real institutions don't negotiate when uncertainty is high. Negotiation doesn't elevate outsiders. It accelerates the process of shutting them down. In the real world, characters like Raymond Reddington wouldn't be consulted indefinitely. They would be contained. Consultation implies trust. Containment implies caution. And real institutions always choose caution when the cost of being wrong is high. Surveillance would increase quietly. Communication would be compartmentalized. Information channels would narrow until no single individual had a full picture. That's how systems neutralize influence without confrontation. The show avoids this because containment is invisible. It doesn't generate dialogue. It doesn't create scenes. But containment is the default endgame of real power structures. The moment an asset becomes unpredictable, they are no longer treated as a resource. They are treated as a threat vector. That transition doesn't require betrayal or drama. It happens through process. Access is reduced. Meetings happen elsewhere. Decisions move out of reach. The person doesn't get arrested or confronted. They simply stop mattering. Containment ends stories because it removes agency. And stories need agency to function. That's why television keeps the outsider involved. Reality isolates first and explains later. The idea that one individual can consistently dominate a complex institution is one of television's most comforting fantasies. It flatters the ego. It suggests that intelligence and willpower are enough to overcome structure. In real life, systems are designed to outlast individuals. They adapt, they learn, they absorb shocks. Individuals don't. The moment someone begins to distort outcomes too strongly, systems respond by redistributing power away from them. Ego clashes with hierarchy, and hierarchy always wins long-term. That's not because individuals are weak. It's because systems don't rely on any single node. Remove one person, and the system continues. Remove the system, and nothing functions. Audiences love the lie because it feels empowering. It suggests that brilliance can override bureaucracy, that personality can defeat structure. But that belief only survives in fiction, where consequences are optional and adaptation is slow. In reality, dominance attracts attention, attention attracts scrutiny, and scrutiny attracts neutralization. Systems don't fight individuals head-on. They absorb them, dilute them, or cut them out entirely. That's why the fantasy works on screen, and why it fails the moment reality is allowed back into the room. The FBI you see on television is a collection of faces, conversations, reactions, rooms where decisions seem to form in real time through dialogue. Power appears personal because the camera needs it to be. Characters argue, persuade, hesitate, and resolve conflict in ways that feel human and accessible. But the FBI that exists in reality doesn't live in conversations. It lives in paperwork, in layers of review, in approvals that happen far from the people you recognize. Real power is distant by design. It exists where cameras don't go because it isn't meant to be felt, only enforced. Emotional accessibility makes good television, but it distorts how institutions actually function. In reality, decisions aren't made by the most compelling voice in the room. They're made by process, by precedent, by risk analysis written down, reviewed, and archived. The further you are from that machinery, the less power you have, regardless of how confident or convincing you sound. Television collapses this distance because distance is boring, but that collapse creates the illusion that power is something you can talk your way into. It isn't. Power exists in separation, not intimacy. Writers remove reality because reality ends stories. Consequences shorten arcs. Suspicion slows pacing. Accountability collapses narratives. If every risky decision triggered investigation, if every unexpected success raised alarms, if every mistake carried lasting cost, characters like Reddington wouldn't survive long enough to matter. Fiction needs momentum, and real institutions are designed to kill momentum. They pause, they review, they escalate, they wait. All of that is deadly to storytelling. So institutions are softened. Protocols are bent. Authority is made emotionally negotiable, not because writers misunderstand reality, but because they understand it too well. They know that realism would suffocate the very characters audiences are meant to follow. Fiction doesn't eliminate reality completely, edits it just enough to keep the illusion alive. Reddington doesn't win because he's smarter than the FBI. He wins because the rules that would stop him have been quietly removed. He isn't operating above the system. He's operating in a version of it where consequences arrive late, suspicion is selective, and accountability never fully lands. That's the reframe. Power isn't intelligence, it's insulation from scrutiny, insulation from risk, insulation from the systems that exist to neutralize people exactly like him. Once you see that, the comparison stops being impressive and starts being instructive. The dominance isn't earned. It's permitted by the story. Once you stop watching characters as heroes and start watching systems as living things, everything changes. If this made you rethink Reddington, there are dozens of other characters worth pulling apart the same way. Subscribe if you want more of that perspective, and let me know which one should be next.